This is the story of a man named Stanley.
The Stanley Parable is a game that first debuted in 2013, and seemed to garner a lot of love and admiration, rising to a position of relative popularity, so naturally I never got into it, because anything even slightly popular was terrible to me because I am oh so smart. Do cut me some slack, I was a teenager going through my I hate everything phase at the time. Again, before we get into this, like, share and subscribe, also visit my Patreon if you want to support the channel. You can get 24 hours early access to new videos, and yeah, that's about it. It's only £1 a month, why not check it out? Let's get back to the video. I first played the game back in, I want to say 2016, probably early 2016, late 2015, around that sort of area. I was rather grabbed by it. I managed to beat it quickly, at least I thought so, only to learn that the path I took was one of many. It didn't take long until the narrative really started to subvert my expectations, and I was weirdly invested. Imagine my feelings then when I saw the game had a new deluxe version available for consoles.
Was it along the lines of, oh yeah, that game exists?
Okay, nail on the head there, but when that feeling passed, then what did I think?
$17.99 for the Stanley Parable's a bit much.
Okay, 2 for 2. Okay, so maybe I was a bit cynical when I first saw the edition, but then I thought to myself, the Stanley Parable having a version released on modern consoles nearly 10 years after it launched on PCs is a good thing. People who never got a chance to experience it due to not owning a PC can play it now. I wondered though, what had changed for this new version of the game, because after all, this isn't just a port, this is the Ultra Deluxe edition. So I decided to pick it up. Let's have a look, shall we? The Stanley Parable is the story of a man named Stanley. He's an employee working for a nameless company. His job is pressing buttons when requested, but one day he gets no orders for any new buttons to press and he leaves his desk to see that the office is empty. He goes looking for answers as a mysterious narrator describes what is happening, saying which door Stanley would take and where he would go next. And eventually we discover a brainwashing machine in the building. Stanley learns that he and his colleagues were being mind-controlled all this time by the company, so he disables the machine and exits the facility, leaving behind his miserable life of being a corporate slave. It's a really good game and I would recommend it.
Ronica, you forgot to talk about the gameplay.
Oh balls, you're right. Well, I guess we need to reset.
Reset? What the hell do you mean by reset?
The Stanley Parable is the story of a man named Stanley. He's an employee working for a nameless company. His job is pressing buttons when requested, but one day he gets no orders for any new buttons to press and he leaves his desk to see that the office is empty. You're given control as Stanley here, which allows you to follow the command of the narrator that we hear. The game is a walking simulator, meaning that your interactions with the game are limited, but I feel the game makes good use of the format it has chosen. Eventually we discover a brainwashing machine in the building. Stanley learns that he and his colleagues were being mind-controlled all this time by the company, so he locates and disables the machine that was being used to do so. You're able to press these buttons when told, and then he exits the facility, leaving behind his miserable life of being a corporate slave. It's a really good game that does a lot with the limited mechanics it sets up, and I would highly recommend it.
Ronica, I feel like you forgot to discuss something else.
Something else?
Yes, the branching narrative and the multiple endings.
Oh, silly me. I guess we'll have to reset again.
Wait, no, that felt really weird.
The Stanley Parable is the story of a man named Stanley. He's an employee working for a nameless company. His job is pressing buttons when requested, but one day he gets no orders for any new buttons to press and he leaves his desk to see that the office is empty. You're given control as Stanley here, which allows you to follow the command of the narrator that we hear. The game is a walking simulator, meaning that your interactions with the game are limited, but I feel the game makes good use of the format it has chosen. Eventually we discover a brainwashing machine in the building. Stanley learns that he and his colleagues were being mind-controlled all this time by the company, so he locates and disables the machine that was being used to do so. You're able to press these buttons when told, and then he exits the facility, leaving behind his miserable life of being a corporate slave. That is, if you've been following the story. You're given multiple chances to ignore the narrative, to define a voice you hear and go off on your own. You explore this weird office as the new narrative paths unfold before you, the narrator going from calm and collected to a complete mess as his control is taken away from him. Each time you beat the game, it resets and lets you make new choices. Sometimes though, the narrator remembers the consequences of your choices from the last game and they're still taking their toll. Really, it's a game about defying the narrative and making one's own choice whilst contemplating the very nature of one's own free will. You might look at this game and think it just looks like walking around an office. However, I find the minimalistic presentation works in the game's favour. Behind this presentation is a great deal of depth, with all the different narratives and new dialogue to hear, and the way the office changes as we wander through it over and over again.
Oh no, not you again. Stanley, I'd also like to veto the line from having any role in our awesome new story. No lines or monitor rooms. Just don't acknowledge it, and we should be fine.
Really, it stands as a reminder. You don't need a lot of interesting props and glorious set pieces to tell an engaging, thought-provoking story. You just got to ask yourself, what story do I want to tell and what do I need in order to tell it effectively? If you wanted to tell a story about a man named Stanley who rides a T-Rex in your game, for example, then you'd need a T-Rex. But if you're just telling the story of a man trapped in a narrative choosing whether or not to defy it, then all you need is a few offices and some basic modern-day looking props and you're good. Hell, a text adventure probably would have been just as engaging, and I don't mean that in a bad way. All in all, the Stanley Parable is a really good game that utilises everything it has to deliver a truly fantastic, thought-provoking adventure that I highly recommend.
I'm going to regret this, I know, but remember, this is the Ultra Deluxe version, and that you've not mentioned any of the new content.
Oh right, I can't believe I forgot that bit. I guess we need to reset one more time.
Wait.
The Stanley Parable is the story of a man named Stanley. He's an employee working for a nameless company and his job is pressing buttons when requested. One day, he gets no orders for any new buttons to press. And so, he leaves his desk to see that the office is empty and sets out on a journey to discover why. In this, the Ultra Deluxe edition... Wait, I'm not supposed to do these bits. Might need one more reset.
You two need to stop. This is giving me a nosebleed.
In the Ultra Deluxe edition of the Stanley Parable, we're given access to some new content, and I have to say, as much as I enjoyed the self-aware narrator and his monologues in the base game, I found him rather obnoxious in the new content in a sort of unenjoyable way. He's very critical of the very concept of the Ultra Deluxe edition, though in a way that stops sounding like a clever subversive joke, and more like the developers genuinely didn't feel like the game needed it. The new edition, that is. I'd agree with that. There's really nothing you could add to the Stanley Parable that would improve the experience. The experience as it stands is impeccably crafted. Anything new would have to be genuinely revolutionary to make the experience any better. This isn't the case. We get a sequence walking through a memory plane where the narrator talks about how much better things were before the Ultra Deluxe edition came to be. Kind of a weird choice to try and make your players regret buying the game, but anyway. I mean, I get that it's supposed to be a critique of the idea of deluxe editions in general, but the fact that this is a deluxe edition is, well, how can I not walk away from this thinking I wasn't supposed to buy it? Whilst we're here, we see a couple of positive reviews of the game that the narrator is happy with. One that labels the game a 9 out of 10, which, if you're listening, salty fan children of the world, it's a very good score. 9 out of 10, that's a very good score. And one written by the glorious James Stephanie Sterling of the Jimquisition. Disclosure, they were back with Destructoid back in when they wrote the thing. So the fangirl within me enjoyed that. But once this bit is done, we see a bunch of Steam reviews, pressurised gas, I just got that, from players who didn't like the game, and whilst there definitely was a level of salt to a lot of these, they did also contain reasonable explanations of why someone didn't enjoy the game. But the narrator bitches and moans, and maybe this is meant to be a joke. It just makes the game devs come across like they couldn't take their game being criticised.
Someone who prefers non-linear games, this preachiness gets annoying fast. Preachy? Stanley? I'm not preachy, am I? You can tell me if I'm preachy, honestly, you can.
But maybe this is just my take on the situation. I am a cynical arsehole after all, don't forget that. We get a couple of sequences where we get to play with some new mechanics, one of which is completely unnecessary, and the other, well, it would have been nice to skip over some of the dialogue, but we would have kind of lost half the game if we could do that, so it would have been pointless. Although, credit where it's due, the sequence where we're introduced to this whole skip button thing is, it's well crafted into the narrative, and it's interesting. I won't spoil that one in its entirety because it's interesting. Let's just say the narrative gets pretty subverted, that's what we're here for. There is a sequence which is a teaser of a sequel. I'm 95% certain this whole area is supposed to be a joke, because the Stanley Parable isn't a game that warrants a sequel, though that's never stopped companies before, let's face it. Really, it just comes across as a means to justify what should have been a port winding up as a full deluxe edition, and it absolutely doesn't do that. I paid nearly 20 quid for a game that originally cost me a tenner, and the game really worked hard to give me buyer's remorse this time around. That's a new one. The PS5 gave me buyer's remorse, sure, but it wasn't like it actively tried to. Sekiro gave me buyer's remorse because it was published in part by Activision Blizzard, who are the fucking worst. Again though, it wasn't the game's fault or even something the game tried to do. The Stanley Parable Ultra Deluxe Edition? It rather intentionally made me feel like a mark. Well, the upside here is that the game being released in this form this year means it's a candidate for my end of year top and bottom 5 games. Remember I did that last year? I'm going to do it again this year, so perhaps I will have my petty revenge. Although I'm going to say now, if the Stanley Parable Ultra Deluxe Edition ends up being one of the games in the bottom 5 this year, then that's got to be a positive step for the industry because it means less shit is getting released. Because ultimately, it's not a bad game, it's still the Stanley Parable, and the Stanley Parable is still a good game. I say though, if you want to check this out, see if the original version is still available on Steam for a tenner, because that's a much better price. I do like the narrator and his dialogue, but the stuff they added for the Ultra Deluxe Edition just does nothing for me. It's a shame really, it takes a lot of work to make the Stanley Parable bad. Okay, as I said, that's not fair, it's not bad. The core of the game is unaffected and it's still really good. It's short and sweet, yet has a surprising amount of content that will keep you coming back to see it all again. You'll want to keep playing just to see if there's any endings you might have missed, any choices you forgot to make. It's a game with true replay value, and the shorter gameplay loops really works in its favour. Overall, A Stanley Parable is a really good game. We just don't need this Ultra Deluxe edition. Yeah, I get that that's kind of the joke, but why are you charging us nearly 20 quid for a fucking punchline? You should have just ported the Stanley Parable, mate. That's all you should have done. That's all we needed. That's all we wanted. Well, that's what some people wanted. I forgot the game existed for ages.